Okay, here is a little bit of information on the project number 1 for the final for ECE 249. And I'm finally getting around to this, but I hope that it will work out really well for everybody, giving you some more information about what you might need. Okay, so the overview of this project number 1 is to select a family with a child with a disability and complete a project with them. So the point of this is to gather information from the family, from the parents, about the child, about their likes and dislikes and things that they can do well and things that they have challenges with, and come up with some modifications that might need to happen in the environment, and also an education plan based on some developmental domains that need to be addressed for this child. So first off, you need to develop a list of 10 questions to ask the parents. Now, this doesn't have to be limited to 10. It could be more than that, but I'd like at least 10. So you want to think about these questions in terms of being open-ended. So you want them to be questions that will give you the most information. So an open-ended question would be, tell me about your child's disability, as opposed to, can your child walk? Because that would be a closed-ended question that would give you only a yes or no answer. So tell me about your child's disability gives you a wide open range of answers that a parent can give you. You want to make sure that you are always respectful of the family and the child. Use people first language, so child with disability versus disabled child. Child with Down syndrome versus Down syndrome child. You want to ask questions that will give you enough information so that you can have enough content to put into your presentation. And then you also want to make sure that you can use follow-up questions for more information. So if you ask the open-ended question, for instance, tell me about your child's disability, you might have to ask a couple extra questions in there to get maybe a little bit more clarity for what you want. Okay, so think about your need too. Okay, so when you interview the parents, you want to always be respectful. This is their home. Hopefully you're visiting them in their home. This can also be done on the phone, but I would prefer it to be in person if you can make it in person. It's always nice to have that one-on-one contact and be able to read the person's body language as well as them allowing to read yours to help them to be more comfortable when they answer questions. You want to explain the purpose of the interview completely, thoroughly. Tell them what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. You want to answer any questions that they might have about the interview. How long is this going to take? What kind of questions are they? Anything that parents might have to ask. Ask your questions in a conversational way. So, you want to start out by pleasantries, talk about how things are going with them, how's the weather around where they are, what kinds of things have they done recently for excitement, anything like that, just to set a nice, comfortable tone. And then ask your questions in, like I said, a conversational way. A conversational question is, tell me about your child's disability. You want to check any assumptions that you might have. So you might have to say, for instance, so what you're saying is that Johnny doesn't like turnips, or whatever it is that the information is. Just double check those assumptions. Make sure that you're hearing what you're hearing. And then when you're done with your interview, thank the parents when you've completed it. You want to make sure that you include your entire interview in your presentation. So you want to write out the questions and the responses. So that might mean that you might need to, frantically take notes, or you can ask permission to record the interview so that you can go back and transcribe it later. Now you need to do a plan. So the purpose of the interview and all of the questions and everything is to come up with a plan. You want to find out if there's any kind of modifications that you need for the environment based on this individual child and this child's disability. So you want to discuss any of those that in your paper, in your write-up, that might be needed in the home or in the classroom. So any changes that might be needed. For instance, a child in a wheelchair, you might need to make your pathways in the classroom wider so the child's wheelchair will be able to fit in the classroom. No really tiny areas that a child with a wheelchair could not get into. So those would be modifications in the environment. What might be needed to plan routine care? So you have children, for instance, you might have a child with a feeding tube. That might necessitate some changes in routine care. Or a child that doesn't know how to toilet yet. That may mean that you need to have a diaper changing area, for instance, specifically for that child. What kind of changes might you need for arrival and departure? For instance, I had a student who had a child that came to her classroom with the child's father, but the child would run away. So the child would come out of the car and then just take off, and then they'd have to chase him down. So there were changes that needed to be made for that arrival time. So think about that. Times that are really important for connecting with children and their parents is arrival and departure. And then what else would you have to change, for instance, in outdoor time for modifications that are needed for that environment? So, for instance, children in wheelchairs have a hard time on the grass. They can't roll very well. So think about things like that. So what are those modifications that need to be made? Don't just tell me that you don't need to make any changes. I need to see what changes will be made. That means you have to put some thought into it. Okay? Okay, so now the education plan. So all children that have a disability and are documented with that typically have an IEP or an individual education plan. So here is your individual education plan. So based on the information that you gathered from the parents, this is like maybe you don't even know this child and you've never interacted with them before. So you would have to know from the parent what kinds of things this child can and cannot do, what kinds of things this child likes to do, and then make a plan to enhance their fine and gross motor. So you want to come up with some activities specifically for this child based on what information you've gathered in the fine and gross motor area. Okay, gross motor being their large muscles and fine motor being their hands and manipulative abilities. Then you want to look at their communication abilities and plan some activities that are based on that information that you've gathered in speech, language, and communication. Then for cognitive development, you want to look at their cognitive ability. What kinds of what's their skill set already, and what kind of things do you need to help to not only support their skill set but advance it to another level. For instance, we're talking about things like concepts like colors and numbers and things like that, those kinds of abilities. So be sure you're aware of what cognitive development is and what those areas are, and then plan accordingly. All right, and then self-help skills. Suppose you have a child that cannot dress themselves, or they have a hard time moving their fingers, and so they're not going to be able to put on their own shoes and jacket and things like that that would be typically expected in the classroom of children who are developing normally. And then look at your social-emotional development. What kinds of things will you do for this particular child to help them to develop social skills and to solidify their emotional development. So let's think about the whole child and all of the things that you will need to do to help this child be successful in the classroom based on the information that you have gathered from the parents. Now, when you put this all together, you want to make sure that you include what kinds of activities parents will be involved in or how they will be involved in any of these activities. For instance, if you have some things planned for arrival and departure, how will the parents be involved in that? How will they be involved in speech and language and communication, etc.? So let's talk about wrapping this up now. So for this paper, I need it to be at least, at a minimum, 500 words. That would be written in descriptive paragraphs with all of the information that is pertaining to what we just talked about. You want to be creative and original, so having a PowerPoint would be really great. It makes it interesting and helps me to be able to get through your presentation. So think about your reader. If you were presenting this to the rest of the class, how would it be creative and original and keep their interest? And then you want to connect to the coursework. So throughout this course, you have gathered a lot of information about working with children with disabilities. So how does what you are writing connect to that coursework? To do that, you will need to cite information from the text or other sources that you have used. You want to reflect on your own personal process through this course and the journey that you have made, how it has worked out for you or not worked out for you, how the interview went for you, how the question development went for you, how putting this all together was for you on a personal basis. You want to use correct spelling and grammar always, and when you do a final, and you want to use complete references and sourcing, and be sure to cite them correctly. If you don't really know how to do that, there's quite a bit of there are a lot of examples online of how to source it. I'm not too excited about which method that you use, but it just needs to be cited so that if I want to go find out where you got the information from, I can go and do that. You want to just use a simple bibliography. If you use anything from the web, you want to cite it correctly. Be sure you cite books and other sources in your bibliography that you're using. It's great too to use it in the body of your text. So as you are writing a paragraph, to say where you're getting some of that information from. But you also need to have that complete bibliography, a list at the end of all of the sources that you've used. As always, I want you to write in your own words, and then in quotations, you can use information from another source. But please do not just copy and paste all kinds of information from source work and then don't write in your own words. I want to hear your own voice in this presentation, and then you can use those sources as your backup, as the reference for where you've gotten the information. Okay? And then, of course, lastly, I would like for you to enjoy what you're doing. I know that at the end, we all seem kind of hurried and try to rush to get things done, but it's always best to try and enjoy the process and going through what is expected of us in the long run. Okay? So if that's all there is, if you have any questions, of course, you can always ask. Thank you.